Solo victory cups are making a return in Season 4, and the new season has brought along a new meta that you need to know in order to compete at your highest potential. Simply knowing the current meta and staying up to date on the best weapons and items to use can be the difference from you qualifying to the second round and completely dudding in opens like I did. But after the tourney, I went straight to replay mode and watched the top 2 NA players to see exactly what they did to have match histories like this. Before we get into the meta, let's meet the pros we're going to be VOD reviewing throughout the video. First, we have the player who won this week's Solo Cash Cup Opens, WTJ OSYD. An absolute controller demon with around $12,000 earned across PC and console tournaments since 2022. He's made 2 FNCS Grand Finals, over a dozen Duo Cash Cup Finals, and won 25 games in Solo Victory Cup Finals lobbies, where each win equals $100, and that's not even counting his over $5,000 worth of console earnings. The pro who placed second in Opens this week is none other than the 3-time multi-regional FNCS champion Muzz, who has the most Victory Cup Finals game wins of any solo player in the entire world. Muzz is an absolute beast at these tourneys and is, in my opinion, one of the fastest pros at adopting changes to the meta as soon as they happen, so these two are the perfect players to watch to learn the new Chapter 5 Season 4 solo meta. The staple of every season's meta is the shotguns. A lot of the time, if the shotguns are bad, people will feel like the season is bad, and if the shotguns are good, people usually tend to think the season's better. In this season, there are 3 shotguns in the loot pool: the hammer pump shotgun, the gatekeeper shotgun, and the sovereign shotgun. At this point, you're probably all familiar with the pump and the gatekeeper, so let's start by introducing the sovereign. Epic seems to like always keeping the shotgun meta pretty simple, with the 2 main shotguns being a pump and an auto shotgun of some sorts. For some examples, think of the pump and tac, striker and auto, thunder and maven, or hammer and gatekeeper. Having a slower, more accurate, and heavier hitting pump and a faster, less consistent, but more versatile auto shotgun gives players an option of different playstyles, but sometimes they can get a little confusing as to which is actually better. But where does the new sovereign fit in? Well, every so often Epic likes to give us the option of a 3rd shotgun, which usually has some weird quirk to it that makes it a bit of a combination of the pump and the auto. Some examples of these might be the striker auto 2-shot meta, the Sharptooth Maven Infiltrator meta, or last season's Hammer Pump Combat meta. From Epic's perspective, having a 3rd shotgun that's kind of a mixture of the main 2 shotguns is just a way to shake things up a little and add an option for a different playstyle. But from a competitive standpoint, every season that has these shotguns, they're usually overshadowed by the main pump and auto, simply because they're just better. But this season, things have finally changed. The 3rd shotgun in the meta is finally a solid option to run in competitive play. Whether you like it more or less than the pump or gatekeeper, you have to admit that the sovereign is at minimum viable. But is it better than either of them? Well, in some cases, yes. As I sort of mentioned before, the sovereign is meant to be a mix of the pump and the gatekeeper, and this is super evident when you look at it side by side compared to the 2 of them. The pump does 190 max headshot damage, the gatekeeper does 138, and the sovereign does a respectable 155. If you shoot a player in the toes, a pump would deal 103, a gatekeeper would do somewhere from 30 to 60, and the sovereign does 101. When you aim around the top of the chest to the bottom of the neck, you won't get max damage, but the pump does 103, the gatekeeper does 92, and the sovereign does 101. So in every one of these scenarios, the pump outtrades both the gatekeeper and the sovereign, with the sovereigns dealing slightly less damage than the pump and slightly more damage than the gatekeeper. Something I haven't yet mentioned though is that the quirk of the sovereign shotgun is that it shoots significantly faster when you don't aim down sights. Here's a side-by-side comparison showing the difference, and here's another very interesting and valuable comparison between the sovereign and the gatekeeper. As you can see here, the sovereign shoots just slightly slower than the gatekeeper, but without hitting any headshots. This means the sovereign will eliminate a player more quickly than the gatekeeper. So with all that in mind, which shotgun is actually the best to carry in solos? Well, let's be honest, the answer is much more complicated than just the sovereign or the gatekeeper. When watching the games of OSYD and Muzz, we can see that they consistently choose to run the sovereign over the pump at the same rarity, or even when the pump is 1 rarity higher. So this means they would choose a rare sovereign over a common, uncommon, rare, or even epic pump. But if they found a legendary pump, they'd likely drop the rare sovereign for it. But this all changes when they get to endgame. Going into endgame, they both prefer a sovereign over a pump at any rarity because it's so much better from range, it shoots significantly faster, and speed is important in endgame, and it does way more consistent damage when box jumping through moving zones. But what about the sovereign versus the gatekeeper? gatekeeper. This is where things get confusing. Muzz lands at his global drop Doomsdot, so he gets the Mythic Sovereign shotgun and carries it throughout the whole game, and OSYD lands at the Raft and WQ games and the Underworld in high elo, so he usually has the choice between a Sovereign or Gatekeeper off spawn, but in the 5 games he lived off spawn, he carried a Gatekeeper out 4 times and a Sovereign once. But in the game that he carried the Sovereign, he dropped it for a Gatekeeper towards the end game. He also prefers having a drum mag on his Gatekeeper, but if he finds a higher rarity with a speed mag on it, he'll still take it. So which is better, the Gatekeeper or the Sovereign? Well, it's really up to you. Muzz clearly prefers the Mythic Sovereign, but OSYD carries a Gatekeeper with a drum mag. Maybe it's just a difference of their input because Muzz is keyboard and OSYD is controller, but I think it just comes down to where they land and how they want to play. In my opinion, the Gatekeeper is better than the Sovereign, but honestly, not by much. The Sovereign is super good, but the Gatekeeper is just way easier to use, and that makes it less skillful, but either way, it's probably better than the Sovereign. Moving on to the AR SMG meta, or the secondary weapon meta, things are a lot clearer. The SMGs this season are simply not worth carrying, unless you have an empty slot, which you shouldn't. The SMGs in the meta are the dual micro SMGs, which admittedly are very good if you're standing right on top of someone and only hitting headshots, but if you're close enough to someone to justify using the micro SMG, then you're probably going to die to their shotgun anyways, or just be using yours. The only practical use for these is to apply pressure, which they are really good for, but you just can't sacrifice an item slot for it. The other SMG is called the Hyper SMG. Just don't use it. The ARs, however, are actually all pretty good this season, which is a nice change from what we usually have, which is 2 good options and a random extra one that just clogs up the loot pool. The first one is the Combat AR, which you should all be familiar with by now because it was in last season. The second is the Striker AR, which you probably remember from Season 1 and Season 2 at the start of this chapter, and the third is the Striker Burst AR, which was introduced this season. By now, you probably all have a preference in which AR you like using, so I'm not going into too much detail here. Just keep in mind that the burst is a bit worse at applying pressure to builds, so if you use it, you should probably have a Sovereign or a Gatekeeper with a drum mag to complement it. The Combat and Striker, however, are both very good at applying pressure and can be used with any of the 3 shotguns. There's one gun that falls into this category that I haven't mentioned yet, and that is the pistol. In my opinion, the pistol is the most slept on gun in the game right now. It's actually insane from medium range, especially if you have the right attachments on it. But should you carry it over one of the 3 ARs? Well, if you get a gold one and can't find a good AR option, yes, you should. Otherwise, it's pretty much all preference. A question you might not have considered though is, do I even need a secondary weapon at all? And the answer might surprise you. A couple days ago, I saw this post from Destiny Jesus saying, best loadouts for solos, by the way, drop AR when you get a kill during moving zones. When I saw this, I was thinking, okay, this makes sense, especially for finals, because you're gonna need to drop your AR for extra meds for heal off. But then I reached out to OSYD after he won the tournament, and I asked him, what is your ideal loadout for opens games? And his response kinda surprised me at first, but when I gave it some thought, it really makes a lot of sense. He said, I only carry a shotgun AR and triple heals until I get a kill in endgame, then I drop my AR for medkits. Something pros like OSYD are realizing is that in this season especially, the shotguns are so powerful on their own that they really don't need to carry a second weapon. As long as they have a drum mag or a speed mag on their Gatekeeper, that's good enough on its own. The Sovereign has 6 shots, and if you shoot all 6 and still haven't killed the player you're fighting, you probably deserve to lose the fight anyways. Before we move on, I also do have to mention real quick the Monarch pistol. To summarize everything you need to know about the Monarch pistol's place in the meta, I'd say you probably just shouldn't take it unless you've already qualled and want to troll little, but there are definitely better things to be carrying. Okay, I'm calling this next section of the video the everything else meta. As far as heals go, it's pretty straightforward as it has been ever since medkits and big pots got buffed. You should pretty much always have a stack of medkits unless you have 6 splashes, then you can get away without it. But for shields, you should always have either big pots or minis, preferably bigs, but minis are still great for fighting. And for your 3rd heal slot, you need to have a fizz because it's not only one of the better healing items in the game right now, but it's also the only mobility in this season. So to recap, an ideal loadout of heals would be something like 3 medkits, 3 bigs, and a fizz, or 6 splashes, 3 bigs, and a fizz, or even 3 medkits, 6 splashes, and a fizz. No matter what, you really should have a fizz in your inventory. That's almost everything we need to go over, but there is one more thing. armored walls. These are actually so useful, and I feel like most people haven't even realized it yet. I could make a whole video on how and when to use the armored walls. Muzz and OSYD are both so good at using them to stop a lobby focus, prevent third parties, get off heals mid-fight, or even just reinforce their builds on high ground. There also isn't any reason not to carry them, as they don't take an inventory slot, they count as a trap. And that's all you need to know to master the solo opens meta this season. If you want another video on the finals meta, let me know in the comments, because I could definitely do that, maybe like a short. But if you enjoyed the video, please be sure to subscribe and check out OSYD and Muzz in the description below.